Hi, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar from Dialogue Tech called Double Your Website Conversions with Call Attribution. My name is Blair Symes. I am the Director of Content Marketing here at Dialogue Tech. I know we still have people coming in, so I will, while I do that, give a little update in terms of housekeeping. We will be recording this webinar, and people will be getting emailed a link to it within usually 24 hours after the webinar is concluded. So I get a lot of questions about that throughout the webinar. So yes, we will be recording it, and yes, everyone will get a link to the recording. If you have any questions as we go through, please feel free to enter them in your chat box in the bottom left. We will have a Q&A session, time permitting, at the end of the webinar. So we'll try to get as many answered as possible, and you can go ahead and answer them as we go, and we'll do our best to answer them. So, as I said, my name is Blair Symes. I'm the Director of Content Marketing at Dialogue Tech, and joining me are Nate Morrissey, who's the Enterprise Business Development Manager, and Scott Berry, who's Market Development Manager here at Dialogue Tech. And together we're going to be going over tips and strategies that real brands, some of the most successful marketers, are using around calls and call conversions. So we've got a pretty full agenda, but some of the hot topics will be showing you the impact of calls on marketing ROI and why calls are so important, talking about how to use call data and insights from media and website experiences in order to prove and optimize ROI and acquire more customers from your marketing. We're going to be talking a bit about how brands are actually doing real conversation analytics and some of the strategies and technologies they're using to drive actionable insights. And we'll be sprinkling throughout some customer success stories and real-world examples of what marketers are doing. So to set the stage, I wanted to show a quick customer example, Arbor Memorial, who are Canada's largest cemetery and funeral services provider. So they generate a lot of conversions from their website and from their digital advertising, but they were only measuring their web forms while not getting any kind of attribution around the phone calls that were coming from their website. So when they started to actually get that attribution and began attributing callers, their ROI from their marketing shot up immediately. As you can see from the quote, once they added callers to their marketing mix, they were able to attribute 150% more revenue, not just conversions, but actual revenue, and tie that directly to their marketing. And that is not by doing any kind of optimization based on that data. That is just by getting credit and proof for the conversions you're driving already. And that's a lot about what we're going to be talking about today, the attribution piece as well as the optimization piece. So I do want to present a couple slides and some data about why calls are so important to digital marketing and to your website ROI. And we're seeing it across all industries. I talked about Arbor, but a lot of big brands in industries are seeing the majority of their conversions now coming in via phone calls. So you can see a child tutoring provider in North America with nearly 800 locations. 90% of their paid search leads are actually phone call conversions. A plumbing service with 600 locations, 80% of their digital marketing leads, that's across all digital channels, including the website, are phone calls. A healthcare provider, 86% of their digital leads are calls, and 63% of customers that they acquire actually come from those calls. So it's not just the conversions, but the quality of the conversions that are so important. And one of the largest auto dealer groups in the country, 65% of their digital marketing sales leads are phone calls, and 22% of those callers go on to purchase a vehicle. So why are people calling from digital marketing websites? Well, one reason, of course, is the growth of smartphones and the fact that we live in a mobile-first world. Google has said that over half of all website traffic now comes from mobile devices. And you can see from some of the major marketing channels that we all use, from search to Facebook and social, display advertising, email, people are engaging with those channels, the majority and sometimes the vast majority, on their smartphones and mobile devices. So one reaction, of course, is that marketers are allocating more of their spend towards mobile. So you can see some stats here, overall U.S. digital spend, as well as some of the major channels and how this continues to grow, and that the majority of ad spend for these digital channels is now targeting smartphones and mobile devices. So it makes sense that a natural reaction to that, when you've got more people visiting your mobile website, you've got more advertising targeting mobile users that are driving these visitors, that calls from your website are skyrocketing. So you can see some of the stats from last year from paid search, social, and display. We're talking about billions of calls in the US alone from these channels, and you can see on the right how these are predicted to increase. So we're not just seeing a huge amount today, we're expected to see an even bigger amount tomorrow. And of course that's because of the idea of click-to-call. When someone's on their smartphone engaging with your website content or your digital advertising, it's just much easier to click on a call button or a clickable phone number and trigger a call than it is to try to fill out a web form. It's also more immediate. People who are looking on their smartphones want immediate answers and immediate connections to businesses, so it's just easier to click on that call button. But it's not just the fact that people are using their smartphones more often to research purchases why calls are important. There are also industries where regardless of how they engage with you, whether it's on their smartphones or on their laptops or desktops or tablets, people do want to call. They want to have a conversation throughout the customer journey and talk to a real person. Industries like automotive and insurance, financial services, travel and hospitality. You can see all the stats here that show that these industries, regardless of how people find you, are generating large amounts of phone call conversions. And that's also great news for marketers because by and large these conversions are far more valuable and convert to customers and revenue far more often than a web form lead. People are calling you because they're ready to engage with you. They're a live caller or a live lead. You don't have to waste resources trying to reconnect to them because they filled out a form. So these are the types of leads that most marketers and most industries are looking to generate. So before I pass it off to Nate to talk about call attribution and optimization, I did want to show the dangers of not attributing calls from your website. So as you can see, if you don't get credit intelligence for calls specifically from your website, you could be missing up to 50% or more of your conversions. Web sessions that you're generating on your site from digital advertising or other sources, they could appear as bounce rates when they're actually an extremely valuable conversion. You might see the data that you're getting because you're not getting access to call data. You could be allocating budget to underperforming channels, ads, and keywords. And at the end of the day, you can't prove your true ROI and defend the full impact of your website and your digital marketing on revenue. So with that, the stage is set. I'm going to pass it over to Nate to begin talking about call attribution.
Sure. Thank you, Blair. Yeah, and just starting off, I want to kind of discuss what is call tracking. So it goes by a lot of names and a lot of things mean different things. So starting off with call tracking, there's several types of call tracking that are available to digital marketers today. Call tracking has been around since, the old Sunday the sales pages where you would take a phone number and you'd use it in your ad in the Sunday newspaper. That was kind of your basic form of call tracking. I assign a number to a specific advertising source, I print it off, and it goes in there. With today, in the digital space, there's a lot of tools available to digital marketers that help them to connect the phone calls back to the digital marketing source that brought them there. So there's things like click-to-call, which are, it's kind of what people call tracking, but click-to-call is specifically pushing a button, a phone number pops up, as you see on the right-hand side, and I push call. This isn't necessarily call tracking. This could just be simply using my smartphone to place a call. So when we get into call tracking, there's really two types of digital call tracking. So there's one-to-one call tracking, which allows you to take a number, assign it to a source, and this is going to give you a call count. It's kind of your basic way of just seeing, am I generating calls? A lot of people will start out with this to see if it's justified the further expense of going to user-level tracking. So dynamic number insertion, user-level tracking, session-level tracking are all kind of the same name for the same thing, and that is showing a number that's unique to an individual who sees an ad, comes to a website, gets an email, whatever that may be. So From this, there's two types of call tracking you can do. There's one-to-ones, which really give you call counts, and then there's user-level, session-level tracking, which gives you the ability to tie a phone call to an individual user. So why would we track calls? There's a few things that you should be looking for and values that call tracking can provide. The first one, obviously, from a media standpoint, is media optimization and understanding which digital marketing sources, whether it's a Google call extension that someone clicks on and calls, or someone who clicks on an ad, comes to the website, picks up the phone and calls, understanding and attributing those calls back to the media that generated them. Going further, that's just a small fraction of the data that you should be able to acquire by partnering with a call analytics platform. The second piece that is really important and valuable, my clients see a lot of value in, is connecting that call to the specific online experience that they had. So whether I drive all of my paid search traffic or social traffic to specific landing pages, if I'm driving them to a brand site and then they navigate from there, there's a lot of testing and optimization that you can do with that online experience when you consider the phone calls. If you're not doing call analytics, a lot of times those can just look like bounces, but in reality, a large portion of them could be phone calls. The last piece is really an operational piece, and that is understanding what happens when that person actually picks up the phone and calls. So there's a few questions related to each of these that you should be able to answer. From a media standpoint, it's which sources, all the way down to the specific keywords, email campaigns, what are the sources that are generating calls? Furthermore, when you add on conversation analysis, you can start to understand, are these good calls and bad calls? Now, obviously, good calls and bad calls are probably relative to whatever your business is, whether it's setting an appointment to come in, did they purchase, are they happy, are they mad, whatever that may be. But you can look at the way that clients have used this is if I'm spending a bunch on paid search, I'm generating a bunch of existing customers. When my focus is acquisition, I want to be able to cut those pieces and reallocate that to areas that are generating acquisition. From a site standpoint, it's really powerful when you can tie that media and the call type to the pages that are generating the calls, and almost more importantly, which pages aren't generating calls or online connections. So being able to deduce that back to, hey, this is a bad page. So I've had clients who have taken this and they've applied it to like their checkout process. And they see that, hey, this page is generating a ton of calls, there must be confusion on it, so they'll re-engineer that page. We also want to look at, should numbers be displayed differently, or should they be placed in more locations? I had an automotive client that added numbers to the second page after the initial landing page, and they saw a 15-20% increase in total calls, just because the numbers were buried deep in a Contact Us page. And then last but not least is tying those two together. So which combined media and site experiences are actually resulting in sales? From an operational standpoint, we work with a lot of organizations that have a centralized marketing group, but then a distributed sales force. And this is a way of giving those franchises or store locations a way of analyzing and viewing their calls and what's happening on them. So are calls being missed? Are they positive and negative experiences? What types of products are people calling about? And most importantly, I think the biggest operational question is how much revenue are we generating from the call channel? So I'll pass it over to Scott to walk through how call tracking works and what you can do with it.
Thank you. So as Nate mentioned, I'll be focusing on the media attribution side of things, and then he'll come back a little later to cover the additional two topics. So if we start with how dynamic number insertion works in general and what you can understand from a media standpoint, let's take a deep dive. So to use a real-world example, Nate, has a third kid on the way. He's looking for a life insurance policy. He goes on Google and he types in new life insurance policy. And then at the same exact time I'm on Bing and I type in best life insurance provider and we click through and hit the same landing page, we'll actually see different phone numbers even though we're on the same site, same page. So at the time of our visit, we have some JavaScript on the site that's done a couple things. One, capture that referring information for both Nate and I, and then show us unique phone numbers via a find and replace methodology. So we won't actually adjust the hard-coded phone number on your site. We will just display to the user a number that's unique to them. Now let's say one of us goes ahead and calls. By establishing unique numbers per user, we can tie that original search to the phone call even if the user switches devices. So if they're on, we'll just say desktop in this example, they land on dialogtech.com, and then call, we can say, okay, this was this exact individual that called, and then track all of the call metadata surrounding that. So what do I mean by metadata? We can understand the duration, we can do a reverse lookup to find name, city, state, address info, and then of course we can analyze all of the spoken words on that call to understand the quality, which Nate will dive into a little bit later. So that's what traditional dynamic number insertion is. We've really perfected it here and done it to the point where we can rotate in phone numbers for multi-location users, which are people with that distributed model. So we could, in the example of auto, show a unique number for each dealer to each session. We've now taken that a step further, and we can start to provide information about what happened for that particular user browsing around online before they hit the site. And so here's an example of the problem we're solving there. In traditional call attribution, you might see a display ad, you might be on ESPN, see an ad for a business, later you're on CNN.com, you see a second ad, and then you realize that you want to reach out to that company. Well, most users aren't clicking through display ads. They'll do something, like a branded search. They'll go organically to the site. Sometimes they'll even go directly. And then at that point, they'll browse around the site and pick up the phone and call. Well, if you're just tracking people at the time of the visit, this call would be attributed to branded search because the JavaScript's firing, referring information is being captured, but you're really ignoring a large part of the customer journey, and you're not giving display and things similar to display like social the credit they deserve for assisting in that conversion. So through partnering with companies that have this impression data, ad servers, DSPs, we can start to tie our concept of the user that we see when they hit the site to their concept of a user that they see at the time of impression. And that allows us to connect the dots on this customer journey and give you reporting in platforms like DoubleClick Campaign Manager, gives you view through reporting. So you can understand these users that are seeing my display ads, later doing a branded search and then calling, you should give some of that credit to display and not just think that branded search is working and dumping more money into that. So, I mentioned one integration there in DoubleClick Campaign Manager. I'm going to take a quick dive into two others that we also have. Gathering source level information is great. It allows you to optimize your media, and we've talked about how you can start to understand call quality. There's another piece of this when it comes to CRM data. So if somebody calls in, we capture their caller ID. In whatever lead management system you have, let's say it's Salesforce and whatever CRM tool, whoever's taking that call is likely recording the caller's caller ID. Since we have those two data points and the timestamp of the call, we can start to map all of this rich call data we have with all the attribution information to the outcome of that call and then track that customer throughout their entire life cycle. So you can literally generate revenue-based reporting on your phone calls and then feed all of that back into your optimization algorithms. The second one I'll touch on is Google Analytics, which is our most common integration. So at the time of the site visit, in addition to capturing all the information that we gather, we can pull down identifiers from Google and then pass those back to them after the phone call. This allows them to reassociate the phone call with the user on their side, again, tying that concept of user from two disparate systems. And they can report on phone calls within their platform with the same level of detail that they would for online visitors or online conversions.
Yeah, and that's a really important piece is, you can have all the data in the world, but if you can't make sense of it, it's not very valuable. So being able to take that data is really important for you as you consider call analytics and doing call tracking. So that's the media side. Now let's talk a little bit about the site optimization. So when we look at the site optimization, one of the things that you should be considering is not only optimizing based on a call taking place, but also looking at where within the site are they when they're actually picking up the phone and calling. So are there pages on the site, like examples here, you see right on the Get a Quote page, number at the very top. On the right-hand side is a store finder. There's a number listed right there. Now, being able to tie that media back to the specific page has been really valuable at helping people understand and then tying it to sales data, understanding which parts of the site are actually generating sales. And the reason that people do this, if you want to flip to the next page, is they give them the ability to A/B test the site experience. So looking at where should I have phone numbers placed, are people bouncing before they get to a call to action page, are my call to action pages not actually generating calls? What's the layout? Should I put these numbers in different places? A call analytics provider can help give you that data. For example, one of our clients, Sylvan Learning, they did an A/B test. This one was a basic one, looking at toll-frees versus local numbers. And through this, they found that local numbers generated 3 times as many calls as toll-free numbers. And part of that is just, I see a toll-free number, I think I'm going to a call center. I see a local number, I think I'm talking to Mike down the street. Now the last piece is, so we've got the media piece. We've talked about what they're doing while they're on the site. The last piece is, hey, they pick up the phone and they actually call you. This area probably has the most data available out of anything that we've talked about so far. So one of the things that we have the ability to do is to help you understand what is that person actually calling about. So we help answer questions around what's happening, what types of calls am I generating? Are people happy? Are they upset? Now there's 3 basic ways to do this. The first one being kind of the mechanical way, so setting up an IVR. Depending on the company, a lot of smaller companies, maybe this is a good route. A lot of the larger organizations we work with, they have pretty sophisticated IVR systems in place. You don't really want to stick an IVR in front of another IVR. It gets a little bit redundant. But a lot of times what they'll do with this is simply ask, press 1 for sales, press 2 for support, press 3 for billing, whatever those options may be. You can tie that, whatever number they push, back to the site and the media, and away you go. It's a good one for maybe SMB and mid-market companies where you have a receptionist or someone. You can layer that right in front of the transfer, and it's a good way to get some data. The second piece is a little bit more advanced. So what traditional call analytics companies can help you with is being able to take a call, transcribe that call, and then filter those transcriptions for specific keywords. So, if you want to see, if you're looking for a specific product, if it calls about a specific product, maybe you're looking for words that connotate that it's a negative call or a positive call. So you can put together keywords and groups of keywords to understand that. The only challenge you have with this is you can have a lot of false positives. So if I have a negative keyword and I call and say, hey, I really don't like that, but I love this one, I want to buy it, you may think, hey, that's a negative call, but in reality they purchased some. So one of the drawbacks of kind of the keyword spotting methodology is that you get false positives. So the latest advancement in call analysis is applying machine learning algorithms to those so that you can look at and compare calls to other calls. So what this does is you take the transcript, you look at who says what words are said, what order is said, and then you start to categorize them manually at first, and then you run all calls through that model that you build. You can get this up to 90-95% accurate. So you see kind of some basic ones that we've done where people are looking for leads versus no leads. As you continue, a real-life example of this is Comfort Koopers. I'll let Blair kind of walk through this one.
Sure. So if you're not familiar with Comfort Koopers, they are one of the largest senior care providers in the country. And they've got, it's a franchisee model, so they've got over 450 individual franchisees where the national marketing is taking funds from them and responsible for driving leads to each of those franchisees. Now, senior care, like most healthcare, a phone conversation is a very big part of the customer journey. So people are not going to hire a senior care provider for their grandfather or their mother without first talking to somebody on the phone and having a conversation. So phone calls are very important, but they're generating around 3,000 calls a week to all of these franchisees. They don't have time to listen to call recordings to analyze if they're working or not. They needed a way to prove not just that the calls, that they're generating X amount of calls, but X amount of quality calls. So in Comfort Koopers' case, they care about 4 different things. The first 2 are whether or not the call is a new customer or a current customer, and the second part is whether or not it's a new caregiver or a current caregiver. So they also do marketing to acquire employees to help them with their senior clients. So by using machine learning, they're able to have all of the calls they're generating from their digital marketing and from their website. That source is captured, the conversation is analyzed for them, and they're able to actually categorize which of these 4 buckets each of those calls belongs to. So then when they go back to their franchisees, they can prove not only that they've generated X amount of calls, but X, Y, Z, and W amount of calls for each of these categories, which is a great way to prove ROI.
And from an integration and media optimization perspective, this also allows them to take these call categories and only push certain calls into the platforms that they're using to optimize. So for example, if you're getting a bunch of calls from current customers, you don't want to drive similar calls to that because the name of the game here is new customer acquisition. So just from a paid search optimization standpoint, that's important to consider. And then we're also taking this data and pushing it for this particular client into QuantCast to allow them to create audiences based on these different data buckets and allow them to target those groups differently based on whatever their advertising goals may be.
Yeah, and I think the biggest point and advancement with this is now you're no longer just counting calls that are coming in tied to a specific user or session. More importantly, you're optimizing for the right type of call. And it goes back to that original piece where, you're spending a bunch of money on acquisition. If you're generating a bunch of support calls, you don't want to waste those dollars. You could be using those more effectively in different marketing channels. The last piece with this is, being able, especially in the distributed sales area, being able to give the stores or the companies access to these call recordings in a very easily digested fashion. So being able to come in, pick the day, select the call category they want to listen to, maybe it's negative calls, maybe it's missed opportunities, and then being able to push play and see visualizations and listen to those calls. For one of our clients, which is an oil change store, we found that they were missing 17% of their phone calls that just weren't being answered. The guy in the store ended up going and meeting with the customer, the phone's ringing, and what that results in is lost revenue to the tune of over $500,000 a month worth of lost revenue. And it's really important that you can dump all the marketing dollars you want into it, but if those calls aren't being answered, there's a lot of missed opportunity. So last but not least, just kind of wrapping this up, if you want to go to the next slide. It's important that with call data, call analytics and call analysis have come a long ways in the last, I would say, 2 or 3 years, where we're able to provide you the entire customer journey from those initial impressions to that last activity before they visit a website or before they pick up a call like a Google Call extension. Being able to understand what they're doing on the website, which pages are generating calls, which pages they're arriving on, understand what types of calls those are generating, and then tying those to sales so that you can loop that back in to inform the rest of your marketing decisions. So I think there's really three kind of key takeaways here. Calls for certain industries are some of the most valuable conversions that you're going to have. One, they close at a higher rate. Two, you can close them at a higher dollar amount. You have the opportunity to upsell. So it's important that you're tracking those. Now, call analytics, you should be not only looking at the media that generates calls, but looking at the site experience and looking at the call experience in relation to that media. So it's really about generating the right types of calls, giving good customer experiences with both your ads and online experience, and helping your clients and your companies increase revenue.
So to wrap it all up, and we do have a few minutes for some Q&A, so a reminder, I've seen a bunch of questions come in already, but if you have any questions, I know we covered a lot today, please go ahead and insert or type those into your chat box, and we'll do our best to get to some of them. If we don't answer your questions, we'll certainly try to follow up with you via email within the next 24 hours. But just a reminder, if you're interested in learning more about ways to attribute and optimize your digital marketing and your website, please visit dialogtech.com. We've got a lot of great information and case studies there. You can also give us a call or request a demo of some of these technologies and have a conversation with Nate or Scott or some of the rest of our team to talk about what the benefits of this could be for your specific company. So with that, I will see a bunch of questions have come in, so I'm going to work with the team to do our best to answer some of them. So the first one, which would be any thoughts, ideas on what to do with the numbers that we collect through call tracking. So I have a couple thoughts, and I'll ask Scott as well for his, but if you are tracking numbers, so if this means the phone numbers from people who are actually calling you, you're capturing that caller ID. A lot of our clients use that information, as Scott alluded to before, as a way to retarget people with display advertising. So either you can use those numbers imported into Google or Bing AdWords or Facebook and use that to actually target those people with your advertising. So that's certainly one way to do it. I don't know if, Scott, you had any other thoughts on that particular question.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what it's referring to, whether it's the overall, call amount numbers we're collecting or specific to caller IDs. But there's certainly, a lot we can do with that call tracking information, and it's really a lot of what we've been talking about today. Providing you the ability to optimize site experience and your media from the calls that are being generated.
So let me ask, okay, I see a question here that we get quite often whenever we talk about call attribution specifically for local marketing and generating calls to local stores. There's a question here about DNI and dynamic number insertion, if that's going to have an impact on NAP of a site. So basically the name, address, phone number. Google uses that information, the consistency of it, in order to rank your site organically. We get this question all the time, so I'll let Scott answer this one for us.
Sure thing. So when Google crawls your site, they will still see the hard-coded phone number that you have on the site. Meaning, let's say you have an 800 number, your traditional 800 number will still be the phone number in the source code, and that number only gets adjusted at the time of the visit via find and replace. So even if you have a dynamic number, let's say you have 800-123-4567 for your session, if you look in the source code, you will still see the hard-coded number of 800-765-4321. You would see that as a user in the source code, and Google also sees that when they crawl the site. So the short answer to that question is it doesn't affect your NAP consistency, which isn't necessarily true for all call attribution vendors.
Right. Yeah, that's the one thing that was kind of traditionally a knock against call tracking, was that back in the day, you used to have to take the phone number off and replace the phone number with a piece of script. When that number disappeared, it would automatically ding your NAP score. So that's some of the historical context for this question. Today, using find and replace, the hard code number remains the same.
So there's a question here about a little more about machine learning. We certainly have information about that on our site, but since it's a general question, I'll just open it up to Scott and Nate if they have any extra information on machine learning that they want to provide.
Yeah, sure thing. I mean, with the machine learning aspect of things, as Nate mentioned, we are taking a subset of calls, a couple thousand, and we're actually having those manually listened to, and then information or categorization about those calls transcribed. Once we know the actual categories, because they've been set by a human, we can reverse engineer the model, because we can look back and say, okay, all of these were support calls. What are the characteristics of these calls? And if you start to understand the characteristics, all of a sudden, if a new call comes in that meets those characteristics, you know that that is a support call. And so that model continues to evolve, obviously the machine learning aspect, and we have PhD data scientists on staff that actually do the interaction with the machine to make sure that those models are finely tuned.
Yeah, I would just add that on a higher level, if you're generating a ton of calls, or even if you're generating only a handful, but you don't have time to listen to the recordings, think about if you had all the data, what your ideal situation would be. What would you want to learn from your calls? And then you can work with the machine learning technology to automatically find those insights for you. So good question. We've got a bunch more. We don't have a ton of time. I might try to answer or ask one or two more to Scott and Nate here. So here's a question. We've got someone who's a marketer with a franchisee model. I know we've covered some use cases on that, but the question is, how do you make sure calls from your national marketing are sent to the right franchisee with call attribution?
Sure. No, that's a great question. So the way to think of this is the numbers are dynamic, but the routing is static. So what we do is we set up pools of numbers for each of the locations that match the local area code. So if it's in Chicago, it's 312. We set up a pool of numbers that are 312 that are routed to that location. The numbers then are assigned to only replace the number that we specify. So if it's 312-123, we use a 312 number and replace that 123 only with numbers that are routed to the number that were replaced. That way you don't get calls being routed to the wrong locations, and no matter what, even if I write it down or I store it in my phone, that call's always going to go to that place. So the store experience and the consumer experience will never be affected when you're doing a multi-location setup. So
we've got time for one more question, so I'm just going to combine. I see there's a couple ones on this. I'm just going to combine two of them together. There's questions about how hard is it to implement call attribution and conversation analytics, and also, if you're a really big company generating hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of visitors in a certain amount of time, how scalable really is this to do?
Great. So from an implementation perspective, it's designed to be easy. We usually take care of all the accounts set up on our back end and get you to the point where some minor changes to the website are needed to get this up and running. So what are those changes? We need our general call tracking code to go into a tag manager or directly on the site, and in many cases, that's enough to get the implementation up and running. In cases where there are numbers that appear after page load, such as a map, we have the ability to change those phone numbers, but there's a little extra site work that needs to be done to do a callback to our service to actually cause that number to rotate. From there, we are able to capture all the visitor information, and it's just a matter of setting up what triggers those phone numbers to rotate in based on the visitors you're looking to track, which we help you implement from a consultative process. On the actual machine learning, call track or call recording side of things, that just happens naturally. We've got a few different carriers we can route calls through. Those calls, are always sent to the end client, and then we can easily layer recording over top without any involvement from the outside company. In terms of scale and how do we have enough phone numbers to actually make this happen, we have a proprietary algorithm that uses about 3 phone numbers per 1,000 monthly visitors per hard-coded phone number. So what does that actually mean in the real world? Let's say you're an auto dealership and you have a sales, service, and parts number listed on your site, and you get, we'll use a low number, 1,000 visitors a month. We need a pool of 3 numbers for each of those 3 hard-coded phone numbers, so you would only need 9 numbers in order to track all of those visitors back to their individual session level. So that algorithm scales regardless of size. I mean, so if you start to move into, Fortune 100, Fortune 50 companies, yes, they need a lot more phone numbers, but it's not cost prohibitive because it scales according to their ad spend, which drives visitors, etc.
So I think with that, we've pretty much run out of time. So thank you, everybody, for all your questions. If we didn't get to them, we will try to follow up with you directly. Just a reminder that I will be, usually within 24 hours, emailing you a link to the recording, so you can either watch it again if you want to, you missed something or want to re-listen to a portion of the webinar. You can also share it with your colleagues if they're interested. So my name is Blair. Just look out for an email from Blair Symes. And from me and from Scott and from Nate, thank you very much for attending, and we will see you next time.